At least 62 people have been killed and hundreds more injured after the Fuego volcano erupted in Guatemala. Authorities say that a total of 1.7 million people have been affected by the eruption and at least 3,100 people have been evacuated. The village of El Rodeo was buried by a river of lava. The National Coordinator for Disaster Reduction said rescue workers couldn't reach some villages because it was too dangerous. The eruption also forced the international airport in Guatemala City to suspend all its flights because of the amount of ash on its runway. President Jimmy Morales has declared a state of emergency in most of the affected areas.
We are working hard with the people. You saw last night how we announced an emergency state. We are waiting for the National Congress to approve the budget so we can solve everything we need. Excuse me now, and God bless you.
People have been searching for their loved ones, although authorities are yet to confirm how many people are missing. According to the National Institute of Seismology and Volcanology, this has been the worst volcanic eruption in 44 years.
I have a little store. When the landslide and lava came, everyone was screaming. I managed to run, but I saw all the lava was close. So what I did is I got into a car with other people. There were 3 cars that took us far away from the danger. But we couldn't do anything else. There was too much lava. My family is buried. My mother, my sister, and my sister-in-law all are buried. One of our sons managed to escape. He's the only one alive. My father-in-law was also buried. I know they are dead. One of the teachers of the community went to every hospital looking for them. But my mother is nowhere to be found, not my sister. We also went to the shelters, but we couldn't find them. I know they are buried.
People can't be removed. We can't take out my nephew. He's buried and we can't see from his knees down. Just by touching him, pieces of him are in our hands. We weren't able to pull him out.
Nobody managed to escape. 2 of them were buried. All my family, it's only me who survived, because I was at work.
All are buried. My mom, sister and brother-in-law are all buried. Only my son managed to escape. He's alive. My father-in-law is also buried.
Our correspondent Mario Rosales brings us the latest.
We are still here in the Rodeo community in the southern department of Escuintla. Right now there is a relay of rescue teams. One group has gone in to rescue bodies. It's been reported that there are 10 children missing. They were playing yesterday in a rec center near the volcano. The search has begun after a family member alerted the authorities. Also, there have been 2 strong explosions which have caused rescue teams to evacuate. We will keep you updated with what happens here in Escuintla.
We thank Mario for that report. The Guatemalan government has declared 3 days of national mourning to pay tribute to the victims of the volcanic eruption. In a statement released on Monday morning, the government sent its condolences to the residents of the 3 most badly affected departments. The government also called for the country to show its support and solidarity with the victims. Switching gears now, in Washington, the U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has called on the Organization of American States to suspend Venezuela from the alliance.
For all of these reasons, Vice President Pence challenged member states last month to do what the Democratic Charter asks of us when faced with an unconstitutional interruption in democratic order of a member state: suspend Venezuela from this body. That suspension is not a goal unto itself, but it would show that OAS backs up its words with action, and it would send a powerful signal to the Maduro regime. Only real elections will allow your government to be included in the family of nations.
Venezuela's Foreign Minister Jorge Arias responded to Pompeo's comments and rejected his interventionist statements.
The aggression against Venezuela is brutal. It's economic, financial, political, and mediatic. We are going to keep going forward, and we will triumph, because here is the historic battle between the Monroe Doctrine and the Bolivarianism. We're an independent, free, and sovereign nation, and no one will impede that the people of Venezuela fulfill its will and destiny of freedom.
The United States has said it will maintain its sanctions against Venezuela in spite of the government's call for dialogue and the release of a number of imprisoned opposition figures. The European Union has said it is also considering further measures. The Venezuelan economy is under siege, but the Venezuelan people are becoming more creative in confronting it, as Ian Bruce reports.
The financial noose tightens on Venezuela and its oil industry. Following the election, President Trump added a ban on buying Venezuelan debt and collateral assets.
The United States will continue to use the full range of economic and diplomatic tools to prevent the Maduro regime's destruction of Venezuela's democracy and prosperity.
The sanctions are already making everyday life more difficult for Venezuelans. Like this pensioner, Luis Moreno arrives home with a box of groceries. It's the monthly delivery from the local food committee. Beans, rice, tuna, milk. For more than 6 million Venezuelans facing absurdly high prices, this has become a lifeline. But it's not enough. So Luis has begun to grow more beans for himself on his roof.
I choose seeds from the beans in the food parcel. I sow them, and that gives me between 1 kilo and 1.5 kilos of beans. That way we get used to producing our own food. Some plant beans, some plant tomatoes, other peppers, and then we can exchange them with our neighbors.
If he planted the whole 1 kilo bag, he says he could get 50 kilos of beans. But he doesn't have the space. Still, it's a start.
I don't expect a miracle, I expect solutions in the medium and long term, because a miracle will only come from ourselves, all together.
A couple of 100 meters down the road, in this historic neighborhood of La Pastora, the parish cultural center is holding a cooking class, with a difference. They are relearning to cook with what they can get their hands on.
If we don't have flour, we make arepas with carrots. That's what this alternative cookery is teaching us, and we work with vegetables which we hardly used before, and they are full of vitamins.
It is their answer to what everyone here calls the economic war, which they blame on the large-scale food importers, processors and distributors, as well as the sanctions.
The big businessmen are the ones to blame for all this, because they are turning off the supply to all of us. And we won't allow that, because we are the children of Simón Bolívar.
For Yulema, who's running this class, it could even be an opportunity to improve people's diet.
This is for the long term, because if we make a habit of this, we will have these recipes forever, and they are healthy, GM-free and not industrialized.
The government says sanctions will make life even more difficult, but these Venezuelans insist they will survive. Ian Bruce, Telesur, Caracas.
The United States is seeking to improve its relations with Ecuador. According to the U.S. Embassy in Quito, the Vice President, Mike Pence, has called President Lenin Moreno to analyze the possibilities of reactivating the relationship between the United States and Ecuador. The embassy's tweet says the two leaders discussed what it calls the humanitarian and economic crisis in Venezuela. We're going to take a short break now, but join us again after this quick look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting. Welcome back. Mexico's election campaign is facing a dramatic increase in political violence as well as accusations of corruption. Our correspondent, Pablo Perez, has the story.
Aspiring candidates for the presidency continue their campaigns in different parts of Mexico. Ricardo Anaya, a conservative candidate from the Coalition por México al Frente, promised to put an end to insecurity.
We're going to restore peace. Families will live safely. Families will live quietly. Families will live in peace.
In the capital, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, the left-wing candidate who is leading the polls, rejected the political violence that has marked this campaign. He is promising a new national project based on peace.
It will be without violence, but it cannot just be peaceful and orderly on the surface. It cannot be superficial. It's going to be a profound change.
The violence continues to affect politicians, no matter what their party, especially in the southern states. The last 3 victims were killed in Puebla and in Oaxaca, where the rest of the local candidates decided to suspend their campaigns indefinitely.
We're going to suspend activities in Juchitán to show that we condemn all acts of violence. We demand that the facts be clarified as soon as possible, but we also demand an end to political violence.
Analysts say the high number of attacks during the last 6 months points to the involvement of organized crime in local elections.
They are not only competing with the PRI, the PAN, or Morena for the presidency or the mayor of a municipality. They are also competing with the cartels.
Since the start of the pre-election campaigns, 110 politicians have been assassinated in Mexico, including candidates and officials at the municipal level. The majority of the killings have been in the states of Guerrero, Oaxaca, Puebla, and Veracruz.
In Panama, hundreds of people affected by a toxic batch of cough syrup distributed by the National Health Agency in 2006 continue to demand subsidies and medicines as compensation for the poisoning scandal. They're also demanding the condemnation of the individuals responsible as justice for the damage done. In front of the Social Security headquarters, victims affected by the poisoned cough syrup are demanding government attention in the form of subsidies and medical prescriptions. As of the current date, they have not received any such compensation. Distribution of a health care prescription for 15,000 recipients. It became known that the cough syrup included in the packet was poisoned with a toxic substance. This killed almost 700 victims and more than 7,000 people experienced serious health consequences. Only 5 of the 11 suspects were charged with minimal penalties, and the victims will continue to deliver statements with the hope of receiving all compensation.
Now that's why we are issuing a call to our president with demands after the promises to provide compensation for the poisoned medicine. And to date, this minute, the director of Social Security, who builds out the program for all patients, has not met with us. This is why we are in the streets, and we will keep fighting for all of the people affected by cough syrup.
And in Brazil, Petrobras has a new president after the exit of Pedro Parente, who was the president during the trucker strike. Our Andrew Vieira has the latest.
The oil company Petrobras has a new president since last week after the exit of Pedro Parente, who was the president of Petrobras during the trucker strike, who had been on strike for the last 2 weeks. Let's recall that they protested against the low price of diesel and gas. Petrobras has a new president, but the increase of gas prices remain the same. Let's recall that before, in the government of Dilma Rousseff and Lula da Silva, Petrobras had complete control of oil prices. Now with the government of Michel Temer, Petrobras no longer has control of oil prices, but the market does. Now Brazil depends on international prices to readjust their prices for the citizens. Following the truck driver strike, the president of Petrobras has gone, but the policies remain the same. Truck drivers achieved a reduction of 46 cents of reales in the price of the diesel, but the price of gasoline and kitchen gas remains the same. Ivan Monteiro, the new president of Petrobras, is well-known and is very sympathetic towards the market. Experts say he will continue to allow entrance of importers outside of the country. He will also continue with privatization policies of the oil company Petrobras. Back to you.
The U.S. Southern Command is about to begin its Trade Winds exercise in St. Kitts and Nevis. It is supposed to help the island's security and emergency forces prepare for man-made and natural disasters.
This week, we will see over 500 military, law enforcement, and civilian personnel from 20 partner nations, including host country of St. Kitts and Nevis, undergo intensive training, much of which had been referenced by your own commander of the force, Commander Anthony Cumry, and of course from General Juan Pablo Ferrero of the U.S. South Command.
4 persons are feared drowned on St. Vincent's Breakers Beach. The 3 children and 1 adult disappeared underwater sometime on Sunday afternoon. Members of the Coast Guard are actively searching for the group. Residents say, along with the rough waves and strong currents, which are common on this beach, there's also a large undergrowth of seaweed on the seafloor. Swimming is not advised on Breakers Beach, and there's no information as to how the 4 victims ended up in the water. And Dominica is dealing with an infestation of sargassum seaweed in its waters. This video shows Marigot Bay in Dominica with the water covered by a layer of thick brown sargassum seaweed. This has been a recurring problem throughout the Caribbean since 2011. It can cause problems for marine life, including sea turtles, and it has been known to affect ship engines. And of course, it's aesthetically unappealing, it can emit a foul smell, and therefore it has negatively affected the Caribbean tourism industry. A delegation from the International Monetary Fund is expected in Barbados this Tuesday to help address the country's financial difficulties. Barbados has seen a sharp increase in its foreign debt in recent years, and its foreign exchange reserves are under strain. Some economists are calling on the new government to cut spending and jobs in the public sector, but Prime Minister Mia Mottley has said she wants to protect social services. And to talk more about this approach to the IMF, we're being joined on the line from Barbados by David Commerce-Young. David is the chairperson of the Caribbean Pan-African Network. David.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, the IMF and its interventions in Latin America and the Caribbean have obviously been controversial. Why does Barbados need to go to the IMF now?
Well, the new government has judged that in order to deal with the fact that the country has foreign debt repayments, which it is finding difficult, if not impossible, to make at this time, plus our stock of foreign exchange is down to only about 6 weeks of import cover, it makes sense to get an injection of capital, foreign capital from the IMF. And so it is, I think, our thinking is that this is a short-term measure that will provide some breathing space that we need to carry out the kind of measured reforms that we need to carry out to our national economic model and to restore local and foreign investor confidence in Barbados.
Really quickly, David, can the new government get what it needs from the fund without accepting conditions that will cut public spending and affect services?
Well, Prime Minister Mottley has made it very clear that IMF or no IMF, Barbados will be restoring free university education at the University of the West Indies for our young people, that we will be raising the level of non-contributory pensions for the most vulnerable of our population. So that sends a message to the IMF that we will not be accepting any extreme austerity program. And Barbados does have a track record. The last time we went to the IMF, we insisted that there would be no devaluation of the Barbados currency, that there will be no tampering with our system of free education, And the IMF was obliged to accept that Barbados position. And Barbados went into that IMF program in the early 1990s and came out within 18 months with no real lasting damage to our social system. So if that is a precedent, there's no reason why we should not be optimistic that provided we remain unified and in solidarity and in support with our government, that we could have a good outcome.
Okay, and is there any possible alternatives to going to the IMF?
Well, there always is an alternative, but I think in the judgment of the government that the most efficient way of getting us out of this crisis is to have that short-term injection of foreign capital via an IMF program. So I think it has been generally accepted in Barbados that going to the IMF makes sense. It's the only issue for us now is to ensure that the IMF is not able to impose upon us any kind of austerity program, because Barbados does not need an austerity program. Indeed, some of us would argue that we have been going through austerity for the past 8 or 9 years without an IMF program under the previous government. So that's not what Barbados needs. We have been saddled with a dysfunctional government for 10 years. We just got rid of that government in a total sweep. The Barbadian people voted them completely out, every seat. And so we know what we need to do to fix the Barbados model. It can be fixed, and we know that we are capable of fixing it. We just need a little breathing space, and the IMF can provide for us that little breathing space.
Thank you so much, David Commerce-Young, for your insight. We've been speaking to David Commerce-Young. He's the chairperson of the Caribbean Pan-African Network. Spain's new president, Pedro Sanchez, has had his first day in office, starting off his governing as a minority before an opposition of the Popular Party, which promises to be tough. The Popular Party has already announced that it will amend the general state budgets in that state that Sanchez designed and approved a few weeks ago with the support of the Basque Nationalist Party. These budgets, with benefits for the Basque country, were central promises of his campaign. Otherwise, Sanchez's challenges are set out for him in winning the trust of citizens who did not vote for him.
We want to raise our voice and say that we do not agree with this decision. This show that the government has put on is because at the end they are not counting our opinion, and this is totally unacceptable.
Going now to the UK, it's been almost a year since the London Grenfell Tower fire that killed more than 70 people. Our correspondent Pablo Navarrete has an update.
On the 8th day of a public inquiry into the Grenfell Tower tragedy that took place on June the 14th, a leading fire safety engineer, Dr. Barbara Lane, has revealed a report which calls on Grenfell Tower having a culture of non-compliance with regards to fire safety. Dr. Lane's comments came as we approached the first anniversary of the tragedy, which resulted in the death of 72 people. The report also reveals a litany of inadequacies with regards to fire safety, including the fact that fire doors, which should have been resistant up to 60 minutes, were in fact on the night of the fire only resistant, in some cases up to 20 minutes. So as we approach the first anniversary of the tragedy, there has been frustration and anger amongst by individuals and groups from the community at how the local authority and the British government have dealt with the tragedy and its aftermath. There are still, it should be noted, members from people that lived in the tower who are in non-permanent housing, and there seems to be a widespread frustration about the credibility of the inquiry taking place. There has also been frustration directed towards the British media, the mainstream media, and how it has reported the tragedy and its aftermath, specifically its lack of critical inquiry towards the authorities who were in charge of the cladding, which has been so criticised for exposing the residents in the towers to the dangers that led to the 72 people that died. So this inquiry has a lot riding on it to establish some answers for the community and to provide some level so clarity so that accountability can be done, as there's a widespread feeling that there needs to be accountability for the deaths that took place nearly a year ago at Grenfell Tower.
We thank Pablo Navarrete for that report. Days of protests in Jordan have forced Prime Minister Hani Mulki to resign. The country's King Abdullah has now asked Omar al-Razaz, a former World Bank economist, to form the new government. Thousands of people in the capital, Amman, have been protesting for 5 consecutive days against a new tax bill backed by the International Monetary Fund, which aims at increasing taxes and implementing more austerity measures. Protests started last week after trade unions rejected the bill, calling on the government to withdraw it and announcing a general strike. And finally, as the FIFA World Cup in Russia is right around the corner, it continues its tradition and has already found its fortune teller for this year. Achilles the cat, who lives in St. Petersburg's Hermitage Museum, is being trained to predict the winners of the tournament that is kicking off in Russia in about 2 weeks. He will make his predictions by choosing between 2 bowls of food, each bearing a team flag. His predecessor was Paul the Octopus, who became an international celebrity at the 2010 World Cup when he picked the winner, Spain. Well, we've come to the end of this news brief. For these and many other stories, you can find them on our website at telestirtv.net/English. You should also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Tell Us Your English, I'm Sani Gray. Thank you so much for watching.